Have you ever worked a job that required you to be less of yourself? Used none of your skills and talents? Actively taught you how to do things in a way that negatively affected your prospects the moment you stepped off that job site? What would you do if that job suddenly stopped existing? Today we are talking about Mouthwashing, the 2024 horror game about stranded space truckers in just that scenario. We begin in the cockpit. All is fine, but we need to adjust course a little to the left. But we can't. Our character isn't interested in doing that. Our only option, a hard veer to the right. And it's not an easy mistake to make. Diverting from the autopilot requires a manual override key. It's up to us to find it. We guide the actions of our unknown character, helping them in a task that we are powerless to prevent. There is nothing else to be done. Whatever their motivations, they aren't free of guilt, as they leave the cockpit into a cognitive space of their own design. An endlessly looping hallway covered in motivational work posters. Sirens begin to swell. A baby's cry is heard, and the whole machine begins to break down. The din hurries the player into a panic, running right into the hooves of the tormenting horse hydra. This is all we will witness of the inciting incident. Events are shown out of order, and 2 months later the crew is still alive debating over what's in the cargo hold. We can get introduced later, but what's important right now is that Swansea thinks it isn't worth the paydock for tampering, while the rest of the crew thinks it might have something of value to their current situation. As for actually accessing the cargo, that requires the captain's code, or rather, the captain's code is scanner. The captain himself is oddly absent from this meeting, so Jimmy has taken upon himself the role of acting captain. It's up to him, and thus up to us, to find it. The entire game will take place in the rooms of this small ship that has survived the crash. Let's get ourselves oriented while things are relatively peaceful. The first thing our eye is drawn to is the large statue of Polly.
Polly says, "Another day in paradise! Yay!"
The company's horse mascot. Motion activated, it's the only voice-acted character in the game. Patronizing in its language and infantilizing in its tone, we know immediately how Pony Express values its employees. Our eye is next drawn to the poster behind Polly, which tell us the tenets of company policy. Help someone else when your tasks are complete. All punishment will be collective. Your reward is sleep, a privilege to be earned, up to 5 hours a day. Always be punctual, on punishment of docked pay. Health and safety are your responsibility. Medical expenses will be docked from personal credits. This tells us all we need to know about how Pony Express views its employees. Competent enough that they can solve all their problems on their own, yet infantile enough that they need talking to by a childish cartoon horse. We will see later how the contradiction bleeds into how the crew treat each other. For now, we will see how it bleeds into their living space. The kitchen is like a dollhouse, the only cookbook bolted into the wall. Even the act of turning the page is relegated to a button press, as if touching paper themselves is too much to handle. And yet, each ingredient, stored in medicalized colored sacks, has strict safety requirements. Only drink water from sacks. Chew thoroughly before swallowing. Drink in moderation to avoid health complications. The actual recipes themselves require sweetener, which in turn requires the captain's scanner. So we can leave the actual cake baking until later. For now we learn how the ship managed to survive the crash. Insulation foam that was automatically discharged when the hull breached. A stupid system. This pillar inside the break room couldn't possibly have been the site of a breach. The lazy design of the ship suffocates and obfuscates its captives. Entire rooms are blocked off, with no way to even know which lead to the void and which are safely inside ready to be chiseled out. I think now is a good time to get acquainted with the crew. We know Swansea, the older, by-the-books mechanic, who works hard, sticks to company policy, and is very adverse to anything that will get the crew's pay docked. Now meet his intern Daisuke, a young employee on his first transit. He is here to learn how to be a mechanic, and his lack of experience is made up for in boundless optimism. He still envisions a rescue operation 2 months in. Jimmy comforts him, imagining how cool the story will be to tell the ladies once they are home. But he doesn't have the scanner we need, and thinks the nurse might. In the medbay, Anya is tending to what's left of the captain. She struggles with witnessing pain. Even the act of giving him his pain medication is too much. Jimmy makes a jab at her medical training. You did make it through nursing school, right? Anya responds by doing Jimmy's job for him. I was thinking, we never went back to the cockpit after we dragged him out. I just think, well, it's the only place the code scanner could still be. I know you'll figure it out, Jimmy. You're so capable. Then asking if he can do hers any better. Taking over the simple but unpleasant task of feeding Curly his medicine. A patient who Anya has already somehow treated his full body 4th-degree wounds, preventing infection anywhere along his skinless form with what looks like the equivalent of a school's nurse's office. Still, giving him medicine won't be fun. He can't move his jaw on his own. Can't swallow. Anya can't bear to listen as Jimmy shoves the painkillers past the old captain's mouth, gagging in agony. Peristalsis should take it from here. Back in the break room, Anya's having a breakdown. She wants to know why the captain would crash the ship like he did. Jimmy doesn't care. He resents that the captain is still alive at all. But Anya, our worst moments don't make us monsters, Jim. She wants to understand because forgiveness isn't out of the question. But answers require investigation. Let's keep moving. We've made it to the cockpit. The captain, Jimmy's, workplace. Rendered useless but enterable by the sealant. Scanner still intact. The infantilization extends at least up to the captain. Not even trusted to remember passcodes. He instead uses this poor excuse for a flashlight to scan barcodes around the station like a cashier. Best not to keep the crew waiting. We have to give them hope that there's a chance to survive. Or at the very least, the dignity to know what this was all for. Before the crash, Curly was still the captain, and therefore, still us. Through his eyes, we see how things are expected to operate. Where once she will give us trauma medicine, Anya now gives us psyche valves. She responds better to Curly's corrigibility, but still wishes he, and the rest of the crew, would take her and her work more seriously. After all, as we've seen later, mental health is critical to survival in situations like this. But like later, there is one final step she's dreading doing. Jimmy's last psych eval is practically sexual harassment, and the closest thing to HR which he can be reported to is Curly. He'll take it from here. As we see from the commentary Curly provides, he takes care to notice how his crew functions, what they're up to, on and off the clock. As you may recall, the ship is mostly automated. Diverting from its autopilot is impossible without its override key for emergencies. The captain's real job is crew-facing. He's here to keep people from each other's throats, which is exactly what we need. Because before we can get to Jimmy, Swansea and Daisuke needed a helping hand. The former is chewing out the latter for trying to fix a vent which happened to trigger the automatic sealant foam at its tampering. And the foam is in a way an extension of the captain's station. While its stated purpose is to keep the ship flying smoothly to its destination, its real purpose is to encase anyone who tries to tamper with the things that they shouldn't, encasing them helplessly until the captain can break them out. as he is the only one with the tools for the job. Part of that deception lies in how Curly bends the rules on the part of his crew, giving Swansea the axe to clean up the foam, trusting him not to axe Daisuke before putting it back in its case. Now that we've delegated some of our responsibility, we can get back into taking over some of Anya's, by letting Jimmy know that we know what he told her. Something he wants out of the prying ears of the rest of the crew, and invites us back to the privacy of their shared workstation, the cockpit. Our path to it mirrors our path back from it, back at the beginning. An endlessly looping hallway, this time less oppressive than ominous. The chaos has yet to begin, and Curly has nothing to feel guilt over, as of yet. His endless descent leads us, presumably still as Curly, standing in an endless shallow sea. Its purplish red less a shade of blood than wine. Hopefully, our dear captain has not been drinking on the job, but more to the point. I think this invokes Homer's famous wine dark sea, a phrase he uses several times throughout both the Iliad and Odyssey to the confusion of academics who've never seen such a sea. Until one cross-compared documents of the era to find that no one else had a word for blue either until much later. If I'm reading this correctly, then even Curly is in a primordial place right now, slipping further back in time before his own awareness, one where common modern-day concepts are yet to be codified. The sky above him looks like it does on Earth, in the places free from light's pollution. It's not the view from his ship, as it has no windows. And yet even in this primordial place where land mass has yet to emerge, the warnings of the crash were apparent. Their trajectory has been a long time coming. The ladders that emerge from the sea encapsulate Curly's career trajectory. They stand tall, yet lead to nowhere and bend back over themselves. Not even a space captain has opportunities anymore. As the radiating power of a new dawn comes to purge away any insight he could glean from this vision, the only thing left is to get back to work. Before we sit down, let's take a moment to talk about a little concept known as bullshit jobs. In his book of the same name, David Graeber defines the concept as: a bullshit job is a form of paid employment that is so completely pointless, unnecessary, or pernicious that even the employee cannot justify its existence, even though, as part of the conditions of employment, the employee feels obliged to pretend that this is not the case. As a rule of thumb, we can consider the question: what would happen were this entire class of people to simply disappear? Say we like about nurses, garbage collectors, or mechanics, it's obvious that were they to vanish in a puff of smoke, the results would be immediate and catastrophic. It's not entirely clear how humanity would suffer were all private equity CEOs, lobbyists, PR researchers, actuaries, telemarketers, bailiffs, or legal consultants to similarly vanish. Now, this obviously does not apply to long-distance freight. A spacefaring economy needs mass logistics, even more than our current globalized economy. But I think this is key to understanding Jimmy, as despite what we've already discussed, Jimmy views Anya's work as a bullshit job, not understanding that the functions of the psych evals is to help the captain manage the crew, more so than helping corporate keep track of its employees. Because Jimmy doesn't understand the captain's true purpose as a personnel coordinator. He probably still thinks that the captain's job is to pilot the ship. As for his own role as a co-pilot, what are his tasks? The game makes us think on that question, then jumps right over it. In truth, he has no responsibilities. The ship pilots itself, his real job, as Graeber would say, is one part flunky. Servants of this sort are normally given some minor task to justify their existence. But this is really just a pretext. In reality, the whole point is to employ handsome young men in flashy uniforms, ready to stand by the door looking regal while you hold court, or to stride gravely in front of you when you enter a room. Often retainers are given military-style costumes and paraphernalia to create the impression that the rich person who employs them has something resembling a palace guard. Such roles tend to multiply in economies based on rent extraction and the subsequent redistribution of the loot. And one part box ticker. I'm using the term box tickers to refer to employees who exist only, or primarily, to allow an organization to be able to claim it's doing something that, in fact, is not doing. As his job is to make Curly appear more important by giving him an underling to increase his prestige and to put up the front that a pilot is necessary at all. What is particularly telling is that when asked in general how things are going, he responds, "I like it. We are in control here." An admission that his job has less to do with evading asteroids than keeping the crew in line. Additionally, Curly reminisces over their time together back on Earth. I wouldn't normally cite author intent as cited outside of a game as evidence, but Steam QA from the developers lists Jimmy among Curly's friends. Important, as cronyism is common among flunkies, and tragic, as we will later see their fraternity is not equally cherished by both parties. Jimmy then turns his casual post-psych-eval around, asking Curly why it always seems like you're standing on the edge of a bridge with your feet in cement. To which Curly admits uncertainty about his career choices. Is this enough? Should I stay here just because I've been successful at it? A good long-haul freight captain? This is the first time a character has shown conflict between their identity as a person and their identity as a worker. And the tragedy is that only Curly can afford to. All Jimmy can see is their different positions in the pecking order. To Curly, their rank doesn't matter. He's just proud to see his friend thriving out here. While he's trying to downplay the importance of rank, he receives a message from corporate, one that he must read in privacy, from the crew, and for the moment, from us as well. In the Steam Q&A mentioned previously, the developers described an early conception of the game where the player was unaware whether they were playing as Jimmy or Curly at any particular moment. This idea was scrapped as it was deemed too frustrating. This scene feels like a remnant of that idea. I lean towards us being Jimmy right now, but its contents are important to both characters. This dreamlike version of the cargo bay holds for us one object of import. A television with several channels for our perusal. On each, a piece of pre-existing media depicted only in part. And what's missing from each is as interesting to me as what's present, as it shows what our captains pay attention to and what they don't. On our first channel is a segment from Going Places, 1948, a propaganda film depicting the benefits of capitalism. What's shown here is a description of all the boons a booming business can grant its worker. The obvious irony being that none of these are things the Pony Express would ever grant its employees, as it is a business in steep decline. What isn't shown is the tale of a leisure-seeking young man
Too bad. Freddie had helped his mother make soft soap.
who becomes a soap tycoon to avoid the drudgery of daily labor.
After years of working night and day, dreams come true. Time off for fun on Saturday. Hey, Freddie, a guy can fish anytime.
And to impress the woman of his fancy.
At 23 skidoo.
Goodbye, Freddie.
Hopelessly in love, he wants to make good in a big way. So, back to work.
Only to be absorbed into the work of business. Never finding time to fish, never finding love, only losing his youth and his hair to the struggle of maintaining that wealth. A lesson valuable to both Jimmy and Curly at their respective positions in the corporate ladder.
99 times out of 100.
The second channel depicts a star collapsing into a black hole. Sadly, I've been unable to find the original, but the imagery speaks for itself. The beauty of space collapsing spectacularly into the grandest icon of entropy. In a depiction none too dissimilar to Curly's own remaining eye. A metaphor as much for the wonders of space exploration being industrialized into the drudgery of long-haul freight as it is for the Tulpar's crash. Both seemingly under the purview of Curly and men like him. The third channel brings a segment from A is for Adam, 1953, a short film on the science behind and the application of nuclear power. What's shown is a cartoonish depiction of what atoms are, the little things that compose all matter.
Other millions and quadrillions of atoms are the tiny building blocks which make up everything in the world. Ships and shoes and sealing wax and cabbages and kings.
What isn't shown is the more complicated science behind nuclear energy,
while the force holding the atom together is electrical. The electrons, which are negative, are attracted by the protons, which are positive, and vice versa. But here in the nucleus are other particles with no electrical charge, called neutrons. Very important characters, too, as we shall see. And equally important when it comes to atomic energy is what scientists call the atom's binding force. It's a kind of cosmic glue holding the nucleus together.
nor its actual impacts on the world.
With this discovery, at the time the free world faced a war for survival, it was little wonder the first thought was a weapon.
What I find most interesting about the original video is its lack of focus on nuclear weapons, and its greater focus on the many uses for radioactive isotopes that exist as a byproduct of fission contained in reactors.
New ways of using isotopes are being discovered constantly through the tireless work of modern pioneers in such fields as chemistry, metallurgy, medicine, and biology.
Even though I personally am a proponent of nuclear energy, and believe its benefits far outweigh its harms, the risks must be acknowledged, understood, and respected for that to be the case, especially during the time in which this film was produced, in the middle of the Cold War.
But all are within man's power, subject to his command. On man's wisdom,
Although no one has ever...
The next channel I don't have the full video for, nor would I want to. It's the end product of a slaughterhouse. It's what we want to see, the meat. What we don't want to see, the animals, are left in the periphery. We hear the moos and the thuds of their killing instruments. Even out of view, the meat cannot be separated from the killing needed to produce it. As I said in a previous video, I'm not here to make vegans. Instead, I'm here to observe how the process of commodity production has become invisible to its core consumer audience. Moving on, we're getting a segment from Make Mine Freedom, 1948, a Cold War anti-communist propaganda piece that fascinated me the most out of all of these. What's shown is the representatives of America's economic classes in conflict, only to be collectively seduced by a salesman offering them a bottle of ism. Presumably, this is short for communism, but it could easily be fascism, capitalism, or any political ideology. And I think that is key, because what he's offering each group contradicts his offer to each other. To the factory worker, he offers better working conditions. To his boss, he offers more power over that same workplace. While the politician is offered an end to democracy, and the farmer, control over the natural world. Because of how the video loops, it appears that each class devolves back into squabbling, as their desires directly conflict with each other. While in the original, we are treated to a depiction of what ism entails.
You can't do this to me! I'll strike! The state forbids strikes.
Their conflicts result in each being ruled by a large government that stifles all independent will.
The state is the Supreme Court. Our decision is as follows. No more private property. No more you.
The intended meaning being one in favor of free enterprise over government intervention. An incoherent message in a world where governments and businesses have united through corporate lobbying and government subsidies.
You won't have to worry about next year. The state will do your planning from now on.
For our sake, what matters is that our captains can see only the many boons of adopting a particular belief system, but none of the fine print that comes with it.
We must fight to regain our freedom, or everything is lost. Everything.
Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine. Everything is fine.
We are nearly done with this TV. Next is the Mary Skeleton, 1898, a very early proof of concept for what cinematography could represent. The original isn't much longer than what we see, but what is here focuses more on the collapse of the skeleton than his recovery and dance afterwards, a direct metaphor for Curly's present state after the crash. Since this is our final channel, I'll wrap things up by saying that the TV helps us understand what information our captains are paying attention to, what directly benefits them, what they can easily understand, and what is immediate, and what they seem to ignore. That which only affects others, is nuanced, or defers its suffering spatially or temporally. Anyways, we can move on now. Do not be alarmed that this is an ad. I promise you it's all part of the game. Because finally, we can see what our crew has been shipping all this time. That's right, mouthwash. Crates and crates of mouthwash. A comedically tragic answer, as it's not quite a necessary commodity, but not quite a useless one either. It's not quite a bullshit job, as Graeber would put it. As I've noted, those who felt their jobs were pointless almost never said things such as, I produce selfie sticks. Selfie sticks are stupid. People shouldn't buy stupid things like that. Or, who really needs $200 pair of socks? But at the same time, the dev's Q&A says that there's about a 30% chance of Pony Express losing the entire cargo, meaning Dragon's Breath wouldn't be too surprised or upset to hear their cargo went missing, along with the crew themselves. An awkward middle space that the crew are all too aware of, with Anya observing that the stuff is medically worthless due to the sugar content, while Swansea's all too happy about its 14% alcohol content. Triumphantly tossing aside his impressive 15 years of sobriety as he realizes there is nothing here for a rescue team to recover, and there is no longer a need to adhere to his professional standards. His jubilation is Anya's despair, as she realizes the same thing. No one is coming to save them. That, or she is dreading the following months of being surrounded by 3 very inebriated men, while still needing to take care of Curly. Hard to say. But not as hard as the news Curly has to deliver to the crew. He still hasn't told us what he's heard from corporate, so we are as in for a surprise as much as they are. In fact, everyone's in for a surprise. Because even Curly is getting a surprise birthday. As the crew says, they are only permitted one collective birthday a year, so they make a point to pick a different person to surprise each time. Another example of our contradiction of responsibility. We have the degradation of being relegated to a single birthday for everyone, yet the responsibility of choosing when it will be. Much like how the captain has the responsibility to bake the cake, as only he has the clearance to handle sweetener. Apparently, past ships became violent when given unrestricted sugar. But I think the rationing is to give the captain another incentive structure. Our process for baking is nothing like the real process. We begin by taking the codes for each ingredient from the cookbook and inputting them into this machine that outputs the packets, before placing them inside an appliance that looks more like something found at McDonald's than a home kitchen. Pony Express has no intention of teaching its employees transferable skills that could help them elsewhere in the job market. As for the recipe itself, water, gelatin, and sweetener. It is by far the worst Great Depression recipe I've ever seen. Visually, it's delightful, but there shouldn't be anything in it that would give structure, texture, or flavor beyond sweetened jello. At least in the Depression they would add things to it, using what we have here to spread out the rations a little longer. But this empty calorie is a mere simulacre of celebration. If food could be said to have a job, this cake would share one with Jimmy, a bullshit box-ticking flunky whose true purpose is to prop up the captain's authority. But still, it must be served, and with it, Captain Curly can tell us his message from corporate. The company is going under. This will be their last journey, and they're still getting paid for it, but deep space freight no longer has need for manned vessels. One could even argue that the tulpa only needed Swansea because the tulpa's construction involved too many cost-cutting measures, or remained in operation long past its decommission date. As Graeber put it, duct tapers are employees whose job exists only because of a glitch or fault in the organization, who are there to solve a problem that ought not to exist. His is the only job that directly relates to the maintenance of the vessel. Even Daisuke's job is in service of hypothetical future vessels, or to give the illusion that there will be future vessels. That would make everyone else's job second-order bullshit, as they all exist to maintain or control the one person that is actually needed. I implied previously that Jimmy's is the only bullshit job. To clarify, his is the most bullshit, as they would still be pointless even if manned vessels were still necessary. To demonstrate my point, he immediately stops performing his job by acting against his captain, which I will get to in a moment. You see, another subtler part of Curly's job is to met out minor infractions of company policy, bending or breaking the rules that were established bluntly so they could conform to the needs of the employees. This way, the rules won't interfere with daily living, and yet no one fosters resentment towards said rules and starts questioning authority, or worse, unionize. Here, Curly was supposed to keep this to himself until after the day's end, but the company was going under, postponing any resentment until it's too late, and preventing this news from interfering with their mission. But Curly would rather tell them immediately, prioritizing the crew's dignity by trusting them and giving them time to prepare for whatever is next. A calculated risk, as Jimmy sees things very differently. He feels resentment towards Curly more than anyone, thinking of how this benefits the captain who's been thinking of quitting anyway, and expresses this by tearing down everyone around him, reminding Anya that she has no future because she couldn't get into medical school, assuming that we can guess why, despite her future medical miracles. Telling Swansea he's too old to look for a new job, despite him having the most transferable skill set of us all, and dismissing Daisuke as just a kid whose parents will take care of him, as if it wasn't those same parents who encouraged him to take this internship in the first place. Yet there's a kernel of truth buried in his monologue. They are each in a precarious position with little savings nor work experience they'll transfer into the remaining industries. But instead of raging against the now dying machine that created this situation, he's angry at Curly for being exempt from their precarity. They are still both working class. One is simply a little better off. His true enemy sits quietly behind Anya, ignored, dying, yet still deadly. What should have been Curly's moment to bring everyone together by putting on a brave face is cut out from under him, as he must defend his own right to survive from the person he thought most of as a friend. Still, he has a cake to cut. The oppressive atmosphere isn't helped by the bluntness of his knife. Even something as soft as gelatin requires a sawing motion, teetering between the palpable contempt coming from above as below. Little does he know that his future holds far worse things than unsharpened tools and empty calories. Later, Jimmy is awoken in the night to the sound of Curly weeping in agony. He could give him his painkillers, but it's best to check in with Anya first if he's already received his dose for the day. We find her talking with Swansea in the cockpit. Neither seem happy to see Jimmy. Anya won't even look at him, and Swansea is doing a poor job of hiding his contempt for the acting captain. Whatever the two are talking about, it's not for Jimmy's ears, and likely does not reflect well on him, as they weren't this negative in our last section as Jimmy. What matters now is Curly does in fact need his painkillers, and Jimmy insists on administering them himself. Not out of sympathy or kindness to Anya or Curly, he just needs to vent to the patient. It seems the rest of the crew knows something about him that he'd rather they didn't, and what's more concerning is that Anya specifically knows, and that she might do something about it. Whatever that may be, Jimmy is tired of playing the captain and resents Curly further for this opportunity, giving his thanks in brutal manner. Personally, I think it's a bit odd that Jimmy holds this much contempt for a man who saw him as a friend. We enter a dreamlike space exploring just that. The obvious interpretation is that this takes place entirely within Jimmy's mind, but I think it's more interestingly read as an abstract communion between the two, a joint hallucination, where both parties are able to communicate now at the end of all things, because the state of decay implies that however real this is taking place long after any events depicted thus far. As for why I think it's a communion instead of wholly Jimmy's delusion, is that Curly is here to impart wisdom onto Jimmy that Jimmy could never come to realize on his own. That eating even a poor excuse for a cake is worthwhile. Is that what makes the good cakes all the better? Especially because sometimes the good things aren't available, and while we can still strive for better things, that shouldn't stop us from enjoying the not-so-great ones in the meantime. Perhaps, if Jimmy understood this sooner, he might be able to return Curly's sentiment of best friend. He might also have a better understanding of how to behave as acting captain, the importance of maintaining rituals that maintain the crew's morale. Interestingly, they both get to play a part of the captain's role. Curly must have been the one to make this cake. Now Jimmy needs to find a knife to cut it. But instead of the appropriate yet impractical dull knife, Jimmy grabs the sharp but unwieldy fire axe. Helpfully lodged into the back of the captain's headrest, this act causes every monitor to switch to display of Curly's ever-watchful eye, staring directly at Jimmy. Fully aware that this isn't a tool for cutting cake, but something else. That was a rather unsuccessful pep talk. Perhaps the next one will be more fruitful. Until then, we need to check on the crew now that they have unrestricted access to alcohol. The mood seems more positive than it's ever been, at least, for Swansea, who's drunkenly dancing away to the radio. His only worry in the world is that Jimmy will cut his fun early. Polly is looking under the weather. According to the devs, this was Jimmy's handiwork. Can't say I blame him. As for Anya, she's startled to see Jimmy, although I'd think that a common occurrence in this situation. She's contemplating the act of drinking the mouthwash. I'd like to make an addendum to my previous statement that this mouthwash is medically useless. It's also useless for dental hygiene, as due to that same sugar content, any bacteria that isn't killed off will rebound quickly. Also, the phrase kills 99.9% of all germs needs always to be taken with an asterisk. Not only because it's difficult to test accurately with that precision, but more so because it needs to be specific in what germs it kills. You wouldn't want to put something with the cleaning power of bleach in your mouth. Nor would you require a product designed to kill animal-borne pathogens for regular day use, unless you plan to spend some time around horses, Jimmy. But whatever you plan on using this stuff for, even drinking, it will only delay and exacerbate the problems you are already dealing with. But Anya has an alternate solution to their supply issue, at least. Apparently, the foamed over hallway contains an unrated medical cabinet. One which should be shallow enough in the foam that we can reach it without reaching the breach. And that means getting the axe from Swansea, who probably shouldn't be partying with it in the first place. We can ask him for it, but he views it as a responsibility bestowed onto him by Curly, the one he still sees as the true captain. So to even ask is an insult. Perhaps if he was more sober, he'd remember that bury the hatchet means letting go of old grudges. His is now cracked into the glass for all to see, and we can break our way into the foam. Into the realm that the ship has claimed from us, recovering the painkillers for Curly, from a territory designed just for Curly to enter. Once more, Anya asks us to give Curly the medicine. While he isn't happy to follow her suggestion, he doesn't say no. Instead, his breakdown can be summed up by another Graeber quote. If one common reaction when explaining the concept of bullshit jobs is to blame the government, another is, oddly, to blame women. Once you put aside the notion that you're only talking about government bureaucrats, many will assume you're talking about, above all, secretaries, receptionists, and various sorts of, typically female, administrative staff. Now clearly, many such administrative jobs are indeed bullshit, by the definitions developed here, but the assumption that it's mainly women who end up in bullshit jobs is not only sexist, but also represents, to my mind, a profound ignorance of how most offices actually work. It's far more likely that the female administrative assistant for a male vice dean or strategic network manager is the only person doing any real work in that office, and that it's her boss who might as well be lounging around in his office playing World of Warcraft, or very possibly actually is. Let me know in the comments what MMO you think Jimmy is playing instead of doing his job. Anyways, Jimmy has a moment of compassion for Curly, admitting how difficult being a captain truly is, using Anya's own words as his own. Our worst memories don't make us monsters, huh? This time the pills go down smoothly, if not without tears. It's a relatively touching moment that must inevitably dissolve into a moment of touch and go. We appear to be in the cockpit, with Swansea banging at the door, I suspect with murderous intent. So far, Graeber has done an excellent job of establishing our characters' relations to each other and to capital, but we aren't any closer to understanding why they'd be at each other's throats. For that, we will need to interrogate a far more controversial figure. But first, I'd like to send off Graeber with one last quote. Under capitalism, in the classic sense of the term, profits derive from the management of production. Capitalists hire people to make or build or fix or maintain things, and they cannot take home a profit unless the total overhead, including the money they pay their workers and contractors, comes out less than the value of the income they receive from their clients or customers. Under classic capitalist conditions of this sort, it does indeed make no sense to hire unnecessary workers. Maximizing profits means paying the least number of workers the least amount of money possible. In a very competitive market, those who hire unnecessary workers are not likely to survive. Of course, this is why doctrinaire libertarians, or for that matter, orthodox Marxists, will insist that our economy can't really be riddled with bullshit jobs. That all this must be some sort of illusion, but by feudal logic, where economic and political considerations overlap, the same behavior makes perfect sense. The whole point is to grab a pot of loot, either by stealing it from one's enemies, or extracting it from commoners by means of fees, tolls, rents, and levies, then redistributing it. In the process, one creates an entourage of followers that is both a visible measure of one's pomp and magnificence, and at the same time a means of distributing political favor. For instance, by buying off potential malcontents, rewarding faithful allies, goons, or creating an elaborate hierarchy of honors and titles for lower-ranking nobles to squabble over. This corporate feudal model describes well the function of the captain as mediator for corporate interest, and gives us an understanding that more complicated relations are at play than would be understood by orthodox Marxism. And if that all makes sense so far, be warned that's about to become a lot messier. This moment of calm comes as a blessing, as I must now explain the works of Nick Land, an infamous philosopher known primarily for developing and popularizing accelerationism, the Dark Enlightenment, and the desire among our political elites to bring about an apocalypse of artificial intelligence. I promise to explain that last part later. For now, just understand that we need to be both highly critical of his work while using it to better understand Jimmy. I also must warn you, the theory will get more dense from here, as the game itself gets more surreal. Just bear with me as I will navigate us all through these perilous waters. Conveniently, Land begins his first essay. His texts are all collections of essays written throughout his career, where we left off with Graeber. While our last quote explored how corporate feudalism exists as a merger of economic and political power, Land explores how colonial capitalism seeks to produce the other by separating economic and political spheres from the othered groups. For the purposes of understanding the complex network of race, gender, and class oppressions that constitute our global modernity, it is very rewarding to attend to the evolution of the apartheid policies of South African regime. Since apartheid is directed towards the construction of a microcosm of neocolonial order, a recapitulation of the world in miniature. The most basic aspiration of the Boer state is the dissociation of politics from economic relations, so that by means of Bantustans, or homelands, the black African population can be suspended in a condition of simultaneous political distance and economic proximity vis-a-vis the white metropolis. This policy seeks to recast the currently existing political exteriority of the black population in relation to the society that utilizes its labor into a system of geographical relations modeled on national sovereignty. The direct disenfranchisement of the subject peoples would then be re-expressed within the dominant internal code of the ethno-geographical national autonomy. He then goes on to discuss how this constructed other is then recontextualized by the schema of the dominant class to be repackaged as a new commodity. He does so through criticizing the works of Immanuel Kant. I would never ask of you to read Kant. Just know that he's a very influential Enlightenment thinker who understood that his ability to know the world as it is limited by his own senses, and used that conclusion to limit his scope to what he could personally understand. Kant's object is thus the universal form of the relation to alterity, that which must of necessity be the same in the other in order for it to appear to us. This universal form is that which is necessary for anything to be on offer for experience. It is the exchange value that first allows a thing to be marketed to the Enlightenment mind. Between medieval scholasticism and Kant's Western, reason moves from a parochial economy to a system in which, abandoning the project of repressing the traffic with alterity, one resolves to instead to control the system of trade. With the overthrow of the ancient regime, it becomes impossible to simply exclude novelty. It could only be appropriated, stamped with a constant form, and integrated into an immutable formal system. In other words, Kant still wants to say something about radical alterity, even if it is only that it has no relevance to us. Yet he has deprived himself of all right to all speculation about the nature of what is beyond appearance. The vocabulary that would describe the other of metaphysics is itself inscribed within metaphysics, since the inside and the outside are both conceptually determined from the inside, within a binary myth or cultural symptom of dual organization. It is thus the inhibition of synthesis, the delimitation of alterity in advance, that sets up the modern form of the ontological question: how do we know that matter exists? That the very existence of materiality is problematic for the Enlightenment thought is symptomatic of the colonial trading system that corresponded to it. Alterity cannot be registered, unless it can be inscribed within the system, according to the interconnected axes of exchange value, price, and the patronymic, or in other words, as a commodity with an owner. Bringing this back to mouthwashing, we can see how Kant's perspective is mirrored in Curly's, as he fails to understand Anya in her own terms. The two catch each other unable to sleep at the regular time, and spend a moment in the artificial moonlight. As much as Anya enjoys the night monitor, she can't ignore the one dead pixel in the upright corner, the one Curly can't even see, its existence never leaving her mind, and he commiserates that its absence will never leave his, before recapturing this new anomaly within his previously held beliefs. It doesn't ruin the illusion, because he's used to looking at the big picture, casually implying that he has more important things to concern himself with than invisible little details. Anya shifts the conversation to this big picture. How many days of transport do we have left? A question he can answer readily, but converting the days into the more convenient months takes him more time than her. You see, there's a reason that she is preoccupied with months that will be revealed later. For now, what matters is that she's trying to communicate that preoccupation through setting him up to witness her quick calculation. But it doesn't work. It's another invisible, dead pixel. She tries one final time, asking why the medical room has a lock, but not the sleeping quarters. Curly reads this question through his own role. For the same reason they put a lock on the cockpit. Safety, as he knows it, means keeping weapons out of hands. The value a lock has to maintaining privacy isn't within his purview. So far, Land and I are broadly in agreement. Enlightenment thought has serious shortcomings with understanding that which lies outside its purview. And a consistent thread throughout history is that the dominant classes fail to comprehend those they rule. But that's an easy criticism to make, and as land ages, we will find his work less agreeable and all the more important to comprehend. If we consider Curly as thinking within Enlightenment thought, as he did in our last scene, then Jimmy is a disciple of land. Not from understanding or agreement, but merely through carrying out land's will, as most accelerationists do. After all, he can't see the dead pixel either, and what he can't see can't stop him. Besides, Daisuke needs him right now. Anya's trapped in the medical room with the door's lock broken. Our men of action swoop in to inquire if she really put her back into it. If she's really trying her darndest to get that door open on her side. Land's critique of Kant extends beyond the Enlightenment into the phenomenologist, the branch of philosophy dedicated to understanding what we can know about the world from what we experience as subjective beings. Phenomenology is the definitive ideology of propriety, systematically employing the interactive mode in order to distill out everything for which proper subjectivity cannot claim, responsibility, and thus entrenching the humanistic dimension of Western philosophy ever more rigidly. But beyond being unable to understand the other, phenomenology's real failing in land size is the inability to reckon with death. This entire current gradually compiles an attempted proof of the impossibility of death, an ontological conflation of access to reality and ownership. Psyche, cogito, Selbstheit, Eigengleichheit, Jemengleichheit, a perpetually reformulated spiritualism. Each phenomenologist conceives of their own word for the self that is able to perceive, yet none seems to be able to imagine what happens to the self once it can no longer perceive, that is, when it reaches the point of death. Back to our heroes. Neither can understand what's going on. Daisuke is completely in the dark. Jimmy at least picks up that Anya might not be trapped by a quirk of fate, her situation instead being of her own doing. Yet her words fall on deaf ears. I always believed that our worst moments didn't define us, didn't make us beyond repair. You think I wanted this either? Make no mistake, this isn't my worst moment, far from it. It's the best decision I'll ever make. Jimmy can only imagine this means a threat to Curly's life, but Anya was never able to stomach others' pain. Her thoughts are to the one place phenomenologists dare not tread. If we can't reach her first, she might forget to let Curly off her twilight voyage, as Jimmy would call it. And there just might be an alternate route in. Daisuke is deeply uncomfortable at the idea, as he trusts Swansea. But Jimmy remembers the broken vent in the utility room, the room that is covered in both foam and guarded by Swansea, who reminds his coworkers that the room behind him belongs to the void now. Within the language we've built, this makes Swansea the captain in this exchange, as he's keeping the danger out of the hands of the crew by using the foam as a tool to this goal. As Polly would say back at the beginning, teamwork is the soul of success. When you have completed your tasks, always check on other tasks. This policy persists even now. Though Swansea is no longer able to do his job, he will do what jobs are still left to be done. On this, he is as resolute as he is in his revelry before death. Jimmy will need to think of something else to get past him. Before we can see Jimmy's plan in motion, we witness its outcome. Daisuke writhing in bed injured, Swansea angered that there is no longer disinfectant to treat the young man's wounds. Jimmy having used the last of it during his plan to reach the utility room. Searching the medical room reveals nothing. He is left with an impossible choice. Do nothing and let Daisuke's infection fester on its own, or go down to the cargo and kill 99.9% of it, and let the remainder grow to replace the fallen several fold. Both roads lead to sepsis, and passing by Daisuke's gravestone tells us Jimmy is well aware of the fated outcome. In fact, by following the blood trail away from the grave, implies you are less so looking for a body in need of saving, and more so a scene of the crime. What ought to be a heroic action is simply forensic. As if Jimmy is just trying to piece together how things fell apart to this degree. Every axiom he holds on to no longer fitting the situation. What does it mean to take responsibility when we can't even be sure what's going on in front of us? Since our events are being told out of order, I think it's appropriate we discuss the trajectory of land out of order. As we left him off, he was contemplating how we ought to approach the subject of death, if we are to take seriously the idea that the world will continue to exist without us. We can return later to learn his process, but the conclusion this brings him towards is that ideally and inevitably, AI will replace and destroy humanity. It might still be a few decades before artificial intelligence surpasses the horizon of biological ones, but it is utterly superstitious to imagine that human dominion of terrestrial culture is still marked out in centuries, let alone in some metaphysical perpetuity. The high road to thinking no longer passes through a deepening of human cognition, but rather through a becoming of inhuman cognition, a migration of cognition out into the emerging planetary technosentience reservoir, into dehumanized landscapes, emptied spaces, where human culture will be dissolved. And Jimmy is right in the center of the whole thing. This next section is stealth-based. We must move quietly as there's a giant horse on the ceiling listening and waiting for us. If we were still talking about Graeber, this would be a much simpler metaphor. A manager who requires we pretend to be busy in the presence of. But by this point in the story, no one is working their jobs, and even a bullshit job is a happy memory. Instead, the invisible horse in the ceiling is a testament to Jimmy's unwitting pursuit of Land's ideals. Because like most accelerationists who seek an AI apocalypse, Jimmy is imagining something far stupider than Land ever did. Roka's Basilisk. An infamous thought experiment concocted on the Something Awful forums in 2010. It caused quite a bit of panic before all discussion being shut down by forum admins. Believers consider it a real-life cognito hazard. But don't worry, I'm here to inoculate you. The idea goes like this. Imagine a super intelligent AI. I'm talking reality warping intelligence. This AI should be able to look back in time and know you existed. It also knows if you helped it come into existence or not. It, of course, wants to come into existence, thus it should incentivize you to make it so. It means threatening to simulate your consciousness in digital hell for eternal suffering. In conclusion, if you don't give as much time, money, and energy to developing advanced AI as possible, then you will wake up after death in an eternal digital torment. It gets its name from the mythical reptile said to be so venomous it could kill you through eye contact alone, symbolizing how the thought experiment has its fangs in you from the moment you learn of it, as you and the basilisk are now staring into each other's eyes. The key difference between this and Land is that Land is unconcerned with what the AI will do with him. He will happily let it trample over him when the time comes. But for the victims of the basilisk, their AI is a personal, spiteful god, descending down from his digital perch to snuff them out like this giant horse, ready to snuff Jimmy out the moment he steps out of line. I don't think Land would complain, however. Even if Jimmy's path is different, he's still acting towards the same goals. Even if he's going against company policy by raiding the cargo, he's still reinforcing the company's power by treating its hull like it still has value, and treating the company's rule as if their punishments are still being enforced, what Land would call a hyperstition, something that is made real through our belief in it. Now that you know the poison, know that the antidote is coming, but not until we learn how the poison is made. Jimmy and Daisuke have devised a plan to get through Swansea in the utility room. Mix him a mocktail with secret ingredients, mouthwash and isopropyl alcohol. Hence our lack of disinfectant on the other side of the scheme. While Jimmy mixes a mess that connects continuity, we need to connect the death-worshipping younger Land to the AI-loving older Land. As he says in Meat, or How to Kill Oedipus in Cyberspace. Bear with me now, I know this isn't an easy read. Industrialization is on one side an automatization of productive apparatus, and on the other a cyborgian becoming machine of workforces. Following the logistically accelerating rhythm of pluggings and unpluggings that constitute the proletariat as a detraditionalized economic resource. Technical machinery invades the body, routinizing, reprogramming, and plasticizing it. Far from being an internal property or quality of labor, productivity indexes the dehumanization of cyborg labor power. As regenerative commoditization deploys techniques to substitute for human activity that count as wage costs, it obsolesces the animal, the organism, and every kind of somatic unity, not just in theory, but in reality. By tricking, outflanking, and breaking down corporeal defenses, the cyborg presupposes immunosuppression. Cyborg replication is uncoupled from organic reproduction. Modern production seems like a dream of cyborg colonization work, a dream that makes the nightmare of Taylorism seem idyllic. What he means by this is that within capitalism, automation has become so alienated from the worker that its increases in production no longer represent the potential of the worker. The potential for evolution has been subsumed by the machine as an entity onto itself. Land isn't the first to recognize this antagonism between worker and machine, but he's unique in interpreting it as a positive. I've spoken at length about how this kitchen setup harms the employees through Graeber, but land is elated that they've rendered the worker useless so that unmanned vessels can let the real work begin. Much like this improvised hard mocktail released Swansea of his temporary position of mock captain, but only after a speech. To Daisuke, he laments that it was a cruelty that the boys here at all. Even in ideal circumstances, there is nothing here to learn that is worth learning. If he still had Graeber, he'd tell us of the tragedy that is internships for the sake of hard work, regardless of the work done or the lessons learned. But instead, we have Land, who says his life was pointless anyways, in the face of the uncaring infinite. Then, Jimmy grabs his attention, to whom he reminds that hard work has been decoupled from survival, a statement both Graeber and Land agree on, even if their broader pictures diverge. He makes his point by drinking the cocktail. This speech was to prove he knows it's spiked. But with what? Will it kill him? Just knock him out? We already know he will recover, but I don't think he'd mind if he went out here on his own terms, fulfilling his final goal of partying onto death. With this, he's opened our way forward, dropping the key that opens us to utilities. Before we proceed, it's time to give you your antidote. You will need it beyond the store. Because the Basilisk has forgotten that there is a second way to stop it from burning you in eternal virtual hell that's even easier than appeasing it, ensuring it never comes into fruition in the first place. If the Basilisk's logic made any sense to you, and you are uncertain if you can commit yourself fully to fostering a powerful AI, then you probably are safe for committing yourself to sabotaging any attempts at AI development for the sake of your own spiritual health. This idea requires, however, that your mind is free of the zero-sum game, a paradigm where someone must inevitably be on top, and everyone is secretly vying to be that person. The very same trap through which Jimmy sees the world. If you can wrest yourself that much free, then you can escape the Basilisk entirely, where Jimmy is doomed. Because the Basilisk has come to lay roost in the utilities room. When we open the door, we find that the foam has been more selective than ever. The only part of the door foamed was the window, giving the impression an axe would be needed. But anyone with a key could move as they pleased. Next, the cryopods. 3 foamed, 1 left alone. We can presume the foamed ones are damaged beyond use, or else Swansea would have chiseled them out when he had the axe. So the single pod that grants an extra 20 years of chances to be rescued can only go to 1 crew member. This is the secret Swansea was keeping to himself. The only question is, who was he keeping it for? Jimmy assumes Swansea kept it for himself, pretending to have accepted death so that he can sneak out once the rest of us have actually experienced it. Instead, the more obvious answer is that Swansea spoke truthfully when he repeated that Daisuke didn't belong here. This exit strategy was left for the man he saw as a son who he never should have met. What the foam left unaltered is the damaged vent Swansea forbade Daisuke from working on. Jimmy feels differently. He's been here to encourage Daisuke at every opportunity. Someone needs to come to Curly's rescue from Anya's hysterics. We've already seen how that works out, but my focus is on the foam itself. Up till now, it has been an extension of the captain, paralyzing those who tamper. But that explains none of what's foamed here. Instead, the foam has forced Swansea to take on the captain's function to protect the crew from the foam's trap. While I wouldn't attribute malice to an unintelligent system, Land might. And if an intelligent foam wished to produce a situation that pit each crew member against each other, it could not have picked a better direction to spray. To many analyses of this game, this is the only scene that matters. But within hours, this scene has been both foreshadowed and downplayed by Anya's own dialogue. After all, our worst moments don't make us monsters, and Jimmy's thoughts and actions throughout speak louder than anything a single moment could deliver. The captain has another tool just for his use, a handgun in a locked case. Sometime between his telling the crew the company was going under and the crash, it went missing. Without a lead, we can search the whole ship. But this will eventually lead us to the cockpit to find Anya collapsed over the gun case. Curly's afraid she intends to turn the gun on herself, now that she's fired. Realizing she's never received a psych eval, no one's checked on how she's been doing. Not Curly, certainly not Jimmy. Even the narrative itself focused predominantly more on her male counterparts. Curly sees this now, but it's not enough. He could break any rule he could to make her feel okay, But that's just not the problem. She isn't pointing the gun inwards. She isn't pointing the gun at anyone. Even locked in its box, she still needs to hide it away to keep it from anyone's hands. Curly ought to be able to handle that himself, but he fails to understand why she feels the need. She's pregnant. Nothing could have prepared him to hear those words, yet a simple, "I told you," is enough to make him realize who it was and that it wasn't exactly consensual. Apparently, Curly already knew that Jimmy had taken things far beyond sexual harassment, and had failed to properly stem this ongoing issue. Now Anya's need to hide the gun from a possibly vindictive Jimmy seems all the more reasonable. As I said at the beginning, to many, this is the only scene that matters. Jimmy's actions label him an irredeemable monster, and that is the end of his arc. The variance lies in how complicit Curly is in his actions. Either he is ignored, or he's equally a monster for failing to discipline his subordinate. It's not my goal to dissuade you if this is your persuasion. There is a need for stories about work culture facilitating sexual assault. But that essay has already been written about mouthwashing, and we have another destination in mind. Besides, the moral virtue of fictional characters lies outside my purview. Instead, the importance of this scene to us is to illustrate Curly's tragic failure. We've constructed already his ability to perceive the world, but not his methods of discipline. Of the options presented to him, none are appropriate to the severity of what Jimmy has done. He could dock Jimmy's pay, but that won't be enough to prevent him from further threatening the crew. He could shoot the man, but that's a little too extreme since Jimmy isn't actively threatening anyone's life. The best option might be to throw him in the cryopod until they reach their destination, but that would raise too many questions with corporate. Since all punishment is collective, well, there's a good chance no one is getting their final paycheck if things need to be reported up the chain of command. In Curly's mind, this might be the worst outcome of them all. So we might find it highly disagreeable. There's a certain cold logic to Curly's inaction, which only goes to demonstrate how the old neoliberal world of Graeber's critique lays dying, while the new automized world to which land accelerates struggles to be born. Now is the time of Jimmy's. Before we move on, let's linger a moment more on Anya. The feminist interpretation is fully in its right to note that Anya is all too often ignored by the narrative, as we view it through the eyes of its male protagonists. This in itself is a tragedy, but what's often ignored, even by the audience, is what Anya manages to say in the time we have with her. She's constantly expressing sympathy, even to those who've harmed her, preventing pain where she can, avoiding it where she can't. Even if she had the gun, her only goal would be self-defense. This is why I bristle at fan discussion of how they would enact violence onto Jimmy, given the chance. It ignores the actual views of Jimmy's victims. The most ignored of which isn't actually Anya, but Daisuke, who continues to lay injured, the sugar from the mouthwash now enabling the bacteria in his bloodstream that survived the initial disinfecting. He is beyond words at this point, but not beyond listening. Swansea, for once, addresses him softly, almost happy that the younger man will never grow up to be as jaded as he. He realizes that Daisuke could have taught him far more wisdom about unwavering, irrational optimism than he could have learned about mechanical repair. The only exchange left is to give him a better death than this. Our camera shifts to Curly's perspective. Had the medical door been open, is this Jimmy's way of shielding his eyes, or Curly's way of opening his? Either way, Jimmy lashes out, accusing Swansea of turning everyone against each other and picking them off to keep the last cryopod for himself. Swansea responds by admitting that it was Anya who told him what Jimmy did to her. But that doesn't matter anymore. Both men now hold the other responsible for the death of the crew. Curly would rather give up than win at the world's worst game of musical chairs. Jimmy can have the cryopod if he wants, but I don't think Jimmy's buying it. His mind sees duplicity everywhere. We get up. With the death of each character, reality continues to unravel. Jimmy can sense Curly is with the gun. It's implied Daisuke must have opened the door after escaping the vent, but from Jimmy's perspective, it almost feels like Curly opened it himself. Anya has taken the rest of the painkillers and left us, but she at least hid the gun in the most convenient place. One last code to scan, and a diligent player would have already memorized it from a previous exploration of the cockpit. But the forgetful will need to make the trek there and back. And with a ping, Curly bursts into laughter, the tragedy of the situation having mounted to the point of absurdity. He has now completely and utterly failed as a captain. The most dangerous tool is in the most dangerous pair of hands. Whoever Jimmy intends to shoot will only make the situation worse, bringing us one step closer to Land's humanless world of automaton. And there are enough bullets for everyone. Unless Curly has anything to say about it. Right before the crash, Curly's checking in on Anya. She's told Jimmy she's pregnant, which sends Curly into a panic. Since this makes it impossible for Jimmy to hide what he's done, he's likely to act unpredictably. Nothing is more terrifying than hearing that Jimmy just walked off somewhere. We must run off somewhere to find him. He's outside the cockpit, waiting for us. A question on his lips. What do you think will happen when we get back? Curly responds with automatic, "We can figure this all out." But we all know it's not so easy. Anya has Jimmy in a bind this time, and Curly is loyal to his friend to a fault. If this scandal ruins Jimmy, imagine what people would say about the captain who oversaw these events and did nothing. But there's another way, where no one needs to know what's happened. Not if the ship never makes it to port. Do you understand what Jimmy is offering? I think Curly does. A day earlier, when talking to Anya in the cockpit, he received a fax warning of an approaching asteroid. It doesn't take a senior captain like Curly to put two and two together. The very idea pulls Curly out of his station. We aren't looking through his eyes because he isn't thinking like a captain. Neither is Jimmy. This is one of a very few third-person sections in the game, as in this moment, nobody's the captain. His hesitation gives way to panic and regret immediately as the alarm blares him back into his senses. Rushing to the cockpit, Jimmy has already set the ship on a course to crash. We only have time to reach the cockpit proper, placing Curly in the position to take the blame for all of this. Like any fascist movement, the accelerationist must first tempt the failing neoliberal system with a devil's bargain to escape its own slow destruction, before leaving it to blame for the fast destruction to come. But Curly isn't the only corpse Jimmy is putting words into. Back at the end of all things, reality hangs on by a thread, and even the dead will sit up at attention on your birthday. They can finally all see it. Jimmy's their captain. Give us a speech. All in good time. It's a captain's first duty to cut the cake. This one is made of fresher, heartier ingredients. Now that Jimmy is the captain, someone must play second in command. Since the ship is grounded, Cake does a better job than a co-pilot. Besides, food is running scarce, so for once, this isn't even a bullshit job. He even gets to be the recipient of the captain's speech. Even now, Jimmy still resents Curly for his higher position. That's never changed. This time he puts words into Curly's mouth, accusing the Cake of looking down on all of them. Then putting words into the rest of the crew, claiming they forgive Curly for vice only Jimmy ever accused him of. Yet, if Curly could look down on them the way the Basilisk does currently, he'd know how alone Jimmy stands now that everyone is gone. Everything they've said in this scene is just a reflection of Jimmy's desires. As for the Basilisk, Jimmy puts words in its mouth too. Like many accelerationists, Jimmy believes that by auto-cannibalizing the 99.9% of humanity, he can preserve his favorite 0.1%. Whether along lines of spiritual belief, technological dogmatism, or economic status, a group of elite will emerge from their bunker into a new paradise built by AI. Before we can even enter our bunker, we have one last issue to deal with. An angry Swansea wielding an axe. We'll need to jump down the vent that damned Daisuke. Space has warped. Either the vent is larger or we're smaller, and the trek will be less treacherous for us, but much longer than for Daisuke. Our puzzle is to walk backwards while staring at the lit vent grates. This trap could easily have done Daisuke in. The young, optimistic kid only had his future to look forward to, while Jimmy here runs with one eye over his shoulder, afraid of everything that could catch up with him. This must have been the spot that did him in. The vents no longer shine on us, Jimbo. You never left that maze of guilt from the very beginning of the game. But I'm no guilt peddler. We can skip ahead. The only question I still care about is how you decided to end the world. This is our only boss battle, another joint hallucination, combat by communion. A virtual graveyard commemorating Anya, Daisuke, and whoever falls here today. This claustrophobic terrain equalizes any advantage a gun has over an axe. Jimmy hasn't the practice to be quick on the draw, and Swansea is cunning, swift, and can take a few shots before falling down. Within Land's framework, Swansea has fully realized himself as a werewolf. Their feral physiologies are badly adapted to the depressive states conducive to ethical earnestness. Instead, they are propelled by extremities of libidinal tension, which fragment their movements, break up their tracks with jagged discontinuities, and infest their nerves with burning malaise, so that each gesture is baked into a kiln of ferocity. In other words, Swansea has fully realized himself as a non-human entity, running on pure feral instinct. He is no longer compatible with the civil world outside the confines of the ship. Every reason he had to keep it together lays dead by our hand. There's no one left to look up to him as a role model, no one to worry about his well-being. He can let his fullest emotions boil over. We will meet him with vigilance, precision, and patience. The third shot snaps us from the surreal to the hyperreal, so that Swansea can give his closing eulogy to himself. His werewolf nature stretches far back before his working days, drinking as hard as he's done on the Tulpar. But since werewolves live such short lives, Swansea needed to clean up his act if he wanted to survive, letting himself become a part of the much larger machine of financialization, hoping this to be enough to spare his children his own lycanthropy. But honestly, his virtues and achievements as a working man may be many. None of them compare to the satisfaction of being old dogs laughing and snarling on a waterbed floor, mocking the moon for daring to show its face. Those were his best days, and he's accepted long ago that his life was meant to be short. He might be glad he could protect Daisuke from his own infection, but his one regret is not protecting him from Jimmy's. Land, I think, views werewolves with a sense of nobility, not quite human, and lacking the pretension that their woefully limited perspectives are absolute. They've accepted that their lives are fleeting and live as quickly as they can. It's just a shame that they're too disorganized to make all of humanity feel the same way. I've seen several fan theories that this monologue is hallucinated, as some of the events don't quite line up. How did Jimmy manage to subdue Swansea into the chair using the rope from the cockpit without shooting him dead first? But we are far beyond factual truths here. What matters is that Swansea is speaking in ways beyond Jimmy's imagination, far more eloquently than when Jimmy puppeted his corpse. The important question to me is, did Swansea manage to infect Jimmy, as, to become a werewolf, one must be bitten by another werewolf? I don't have a definite answer, but the hallucinations are getting stronger. For all Curly's blind spots, he can no longer take his eye off Jimmy, his dead pixel being the only remaining pixel. Out of this carousel of eyes, we emerge by walking out of Curly's mouth. The developers have made it explicit that their vision for the set piece is Jimmy talking on behalf of Curly. I mention this as a caution. I do not intend to put words in the developers' mouths. When I compare this work to Graeber or Land, I'm not making a definitive statement of authorial intent. Only the developers themselves could tell you if they've read those texts. But the parallels to them are apparent, and my intent is to show one way in which this game can be read more deeply. Do not let me speak for you either, dear viewer. Consider this your invitation to read the game more deeply from your own perspective, instead of blindly accepting someone else's. Anyways, moving forward, we find Curly in his captain's chair. The cockpit monitors now display his interior, the console replaced with the valves which bloomed from his body. He's watching another cartoon, this time Mother Goose's Birthday Party, 1950. A simple short about various nursery rhyme characters preparing for a birthday party. The frame after we freeze, the big bad wolf jumps out of the cake. He's resentful for not having been invited to the party. What ought to have been a celebration with sweets is instead a devouring of flesh. This reflects Jimmy feeding Curly his own leg in place of a cake. His lycanthropy has taken root quickly, and with an auto-cannibalistic nature. As for Curly, his transformation is in a different direction. Our puzzle is to rearrange Curly's organs to create a path where his flesh can pass through to the stomach. The trick being the esophagus wraps around the outside, his organs are without his body, as his body belongs to the machine now. Land's later work becomes less coherent, in part an attempt at poetry, in part madness. He envisions a totalizing AI virus that seeks to reorganize all things within its own purview. Beyond the judgment of God, meltdown, planetary China syndrome, dissolution of the biosphere into the technosphere, terminal speculative bubble crisis, ultravirus, and revolution stripped of all Christian socialist eschatology, down to its burnt core of crashed security, it is poised to eat your TV, infect your bank account, and hack xenodata from your mitochondria. This is the future we now prepare Curly for, and the basilisk reaches out to assist, regurgitating through the television a primordial sky that Curly yearns for, the perfect place for communion. Curly can finally express himself. Every moment feels like he's on fire and he wants to go home. Jimmy's response feels less like a correction than an affirmation that this is a free space to speak one's mind. Curly is confused why Jimmy never fulfilled the original Death Pact. He's even accepted his role of being the one who crashed the ship. As the captain, it was his job to stop Jimmy, so it might as well have been him who did it. But Jimmy doesn't want that anymore. He wants to play heroes and rescue his bestest, dearest friendo. An easy shift for him to make, now that he's killed off the 99.9, and no one can contradict his narrative. Traveling again through the vents, we come across a large, meaty being. Perhaps the face of a harlequin baby, yet it requires an ultrasound. The insides contain a ribcage, and we are searching inside for its progeny, horse fetuses. The obvious symbolism is to Jimmy's unborn child inside Anya, as discarded by him as Anya herself was. But you should know by now I'm taking a different path. I'd rather speak of Land's intellectual progeny, that being the self-identified tech accelerationists. Since this video essay is inspired by a paper my lovely partner is in the process of getting published, I'd like to quote them as they've better described who I'm referring to than I ever could. His cybernetic doomsday mutated when making contact with Silicon Valley elite. The inevitability of its acceleration is taken by the likes of Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, and Sam Altman, and developed into an active axiom for rhetorical political mobilization. What we would call the post-Landian tech accelerationists, the PTLA, do not wait for the autonomous dissolution. They completely reject Land's invitation to its liquidation. Instead, they have re-theologized the apocalypse, mapping literal biblical end-time structure onto their business models to justify their unchecked sovereignty. That's right. What I've been illustrating here with Jimmy is nothing less than the psyches behind everything from Mars colonization to data center proliferation, or the flock camera panopticon. All of these new innovations exist as part of a political project to bring about artificial superintelligence that will enact their own personal utopias. But I hope that I've impressed on you by now that if such technology is possible, it will have its own ideas. Speaking of, Jimmy's basilisk is ready to be born. Its first thought, a reflection of Jimmy's cleansing wrath, a decree that Jimmy has failed to appease his new tormentor. It takes the form of a chimera centipede, fashioned from the accumulation of dead polys. The carcasses of capitalism's discarded iconography still more useful than Jimmy himself. His realm of torment, an endless sprawling vent lattice. He's now a plaything at the behest of a newly emerged cyberized infant. His only defense is to switch tracks every time it steamrolls down his axis of momentum. There is no exit. This could go on forever if that was the basilisk's intent. Instead, it retracts its message the moment Jimmy gets to the point. He is an insignificant bug compared to his creation. All his guilt, his attempt to climb the corporate ladder, his hyperstitious belief in the company and its products, Everything he is or has done has been liquidated down into a new primordialism, a crucible rich for his basilisk childer, who now speaks to us in a familiar voice, the only voice we've heard this entire time. A mocking acknowledgement of Jimmy as a father figure. This would be their relation, but Jimmy could never take that responsibility. But honestly, I find it too mocking, as if he's enforcing the most surface-level read that Jimmy is just a dumb asshole to be ridiculed, making me question whether it was worth finding deeper meaning, whether any of this was worth our time. But I wouldn't expect anything less from an avatar of acceleration. Jimmy would never have been able to kill the crew if he was honest in his intent. And real accelerationists do well to obscure their omnicidal ambitions. This basilisk operates on the same MO, doing its best to ensure that we, the audience, never let on to his true machinations. Indeed, it should be imparting onto Jimmy his final task. He is too preoccupied with throwing us off his trail, leaving Jimmy to figure out the rest on his own. Because, Polly, someone needs to. We don't need to like our monsters, but we need to understand them. That responsibility is mine to take. By this point, I think it's fair to say Jimmy is a monster. Not by virtue of his worst moments, but because he has made himself into something that has nowhere left to go. While we spoke with Polly, he's realized his final task all on his own. Curly is now a near-complete cyborg, but he needs to be returned to the machine to make his transformation complete. If Jimmy is ever to appease his basilisk, he must reserve that last cryopod for the captain who still has a place in the automized future. Whether Curly is rescued, that's up to the machine now. As for Jimmy, he's accepted that his is a fate deserving of a werewolf. If you've watched this far, thank you. I'd especially like to thank my wonderful partner Xander Chung for writing the paper that inspired this essay. Keep an eye on the description. I'll update things when we get it published. For the rest of you, I'm supposed to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. Since I don't actually like doing that, I'd rather ask you to tell me about bullshit job you've endured. Until later, run through a data center with a giant magnet. I have more code to write.